presentation introduces you to the terminology management component of Translation Commons Language Digitization Initiative. Starting from UN support for Indigenous peoples' rights, the rights of Indigenous languages, and access to digital environments on the part of all peoples, Translation Commons has worked to address the issue that although half the world's population speaks one of the 10 most common languages, only 1,000 of the world's languages have actually been digitized. In response to this situation, we have, among other things, created a wide variety of resources, including a set of guidelines, starting with our Zero to Digital guideline, which lays out a framework for digitizing languages and creating a wealth of resources, coupled with the language data gathering guidelines, which discuss how to collect data, ideas about storing data, creating digital resources that can be reused in Indigenous environments, and our two-part Indigenous Interpreters series, because none of this would be possible without training speakers of Indigenous languages to act as interpreters, in many cases to document their Indigenous language in concert with whatever dominant language they may be working with in their computing environment. Finally, we have our terminology guidelines, which provide guidance in collecting and documenting lexical information and terminological information. All of these guidelines are based on a structure for digitization, which is reflected in the flowchart that you see on the left, although I'm afraid it's not very large, depends on what kind of screen you've got. We can run through the steps. The first question is, do you have a language code? Has your language been registered and recognized by the Unicode Consortium so that you have a code that can be used in bringing the language to the web? You may not be aware, but the language codes form the basis really for the World Wide Web as we know it. And without a code, your language has no place on the web. Do you have a Unicode font for your language? It's not enough just to have a code for your language. You have to be able to express the content of your language using a script in a registered font. And we'll look at that more in a minute. Has this font been implemented on devices? Usually it starts perhaps with using your font on a phone or an iPad, a computer, using your font in a variety of applications. All this depends on having a keyboard or a keypad that can realize your font in those implementations. And then enlisting the creators of apps like standard word processing programs, text processing, terminology management, CAT tools for translation, a variety of resources that you need if you're going to fully digitize your language, with the goal out there on the far end of being able to process text, translate them, and even in the end result to create neural networks that will enable you to process your language in machine translation and ontology and knowledge management. It all starts with a font. This particular font is called the Silabario Amazonico. It's one of a number of fonts that are being developed worldwide to use with Indigenous languages. This one being developed in South America for Amazon Basin languages. It's based on symbols that are used in pre-Columbian Writing, we often think of this as pre-Columbian art, but these are actually writing systems. These kinds of fonts enable Indigenous communities to use internet technology while maintaining their cultural heritage. If there's any familiarity with these old texts, your modern and your ancient flow together. It engages speakers and young learners to learn the language using their own font, to employ modern media in their education to convert oral communication to written text, to identify the technology for education, but also for the preservation of the knowledge that resides in their culture. In order to do all this, it's essential to engage the community in preserving the language. Often, young people who have had education on the outside, in other words, have a dominant language background in addition to their Indigenous language, go back, so to speak, into their community, engage the leaders of their community, the elders of their community, and document the language as it resides with the older people in the community who still use the Indigenous language. This involves evaluating existing resources and new approaches, identifying practical use of language tools and how they can be enabled with this particular language in this particular culture. This may involve connecting to communities where standards are being developed, and certainly connecting with folks who have done this before. And this is where Translation Commons can provide guidance in creating scripts, in creating fonts, and activating keyboards for those fonts. The terminology guidelines mirror these initial steps. In fact, this slide is very similar to the previous one, with the goal of collecting audio materials that can be transcribed and digitized. Once you begin to collect words, you can begin to create word lists. And word lists in and of themselves are useful to human beings. And we can use them in developing grammars and documenting grammatical elements, what's a verb, what's a noun, and that may be difficult in your language, a distinction that may be foreign to your language. And the spelling, identifying variants, because often if languages are not written down, there's a great degree of variability. Analyzing concepts, and we focus on concepts because every language has polysemy, and many times the polysemic meanings in one language do not mirror polysemic meanings in another language. In order to identify the way terms are used in the culture and document it, we need to separate terms from the concepts that they represent. Then we need to think about digitization of the information, and the terminology we have mentioned here is actually a free terminology management system developed in Ireland that we haven't really established a relationship with them, but they're in my sights as a place to go if we need a terminology management system. The goal then is to create what we call bytext, which are segments of translations. As we collect this information, we begin to translate it, we begin to collect segments, and when we have enough segments and we manipulate them appropriately, we begin to create machine translation environments. Here you see the representation of how we might go from the word email in English to the word lightning paper in Cherokee, and a representative terminological entry, part of which is obscured here, but the goal being to move to sophisticated, technically modern terminological entries that then can be used to interact with machine translation systems and to create knowledge management systems based on our terminology. So that is a nutshell view of managing terminology management in the context of the digital initiative in Translation Commons. Thank you very much.